My name's Steve Feather. I'm not an Appcelerator shill. I'm a guy who uses the technology, and I was asked to come and just kind of tell you guys what it can do, give you a brief introduction on the technology, walk you through some demos, and answer questions. That's really my forte. So we've been allotted 70 to 75 minutes. Oh, I hope we don't take that. I hope you have time to stand up, stretch, go to the bathroom, get a snack afterwards. I'll be around for Q&A as long as necessary. Go ahead and start. If I say too many times, I apologize. It's the cold medicine. It's spring starting in Georgia, and I hear everybody walking and coughing, so I apologize in advance if I start that. Again, I'm Steve Feather. I'm the founder of Feather Direct. We started in 2009 doing specifically SEO, reputation management, moved into mobile development natively. We had to find a solution that would save us money and our clients money. Having 2 devs on every project is expensive, and we shopped around, came across Appcelerator, evaluated everybody out at the time, and we settled on Appcelerator. And as we go through the rest of the hour, I'll explain why. All right, a lot of the bullet points on my slides are not company speak, they're the stuff that we experience. So if I give you a number, it's the numbers and the metrics that come out of our project since 2009, all right? I've worked with Macmillan and Manning and some others, PAC-T. I'm an author, specifically in the JavaScript area. I started in '96 was the first book I wrote. '96, we had JavaScript on servers put out by Netscape. We've come full circle in my lifetime because now you guys are running Node, and we've got pure JavaScript running on servers, powering APIs, talking to databases. That's where I started. Put up Netscape servers that would talk to Informix or Oracle databases that pulled AirTouch cellular tower information off. So a technician could walk in and go, hey, look, we've got this layout in an AirTouch cellular tower. That's kind of cool. Unfortunately, that work has been absorbed by somebody else because they all got merged into the big 3 and that's gone. So that's where I kind of started. I do carry a title of Appcelerator Titan. That just means I work with the community doing user groups. We'll come and speak at things like this, share our experience, do some training every now and then. I used to have expert on the slide. That's pretentious. The only difference between an expert and the person who's not is the expert has had an opportunity and time to fail more often than the other guy. The only reason I could be considered an expert is because the knowledge that I have came from stumbling a bunch of times, making mistakes since the first time I wrote my first bit of code. All right, that's the only difference between what I carry and anybody else. 5 years from now, anybody in this industry, they're going to be at the same level I am today. It's all about time and how much you're willing to put in and learn and better yourself. That means cross-study. If you're a Node guy, be looking at mobile. If you're a mobile guy, be looking at the back end for API. How many folks right now are stuck in the jQuery web world and they're like, well, we don't need that anymore, we need a native app. And now you're stuck saying, well, the skills that I had over here, I can't carry over here. Too often folks who are in a job, because they're working 10 hours a day, don't have the opportunity to study anything extra. And so when the layoffs come, they're sitting there going, I'm not marketable. I've had a good job for 3 or 4 years, but now I can't move into anything else. I haven't had the time. So I'll throw that one out as a freebie for the young guys and some of us old guys. It's easy for us to fall behind too. Open source contributor, if you want to hear rants about anything, I'm on Twitter at Stephen Feather, and every now and then I write an article in mobile. I haven't written anything in a year because I've been really busy. Business has been good. Our firm is out of Fayette County. We've got right about 10 guys we can pull in from other firms if we need to. If you guys need help with a mobile project, feel free to talk to me afterwards. But that's not why you came. That's just why you should listen to me. You're here because you want to build mobile. How many of you guys are currently looking at mobile? Let me back up. How many of you have projects that are about to start in mobile? All right. How many of you have projects that are currently going? All right. Now let's ask some questions. ObjectiveC. How many of you guys know ObjectiveC? How many of you guys know Java? All right. What are you Java guys going to do about the iOS, who is where most of the money comes when you build an app? How many of you guys are in enterprise versus startup or indie, you want to write your own app? Enterprise. All right? And the rest of us. A couple of us, okay? How many of you have no idea, you just figured you want to come to a cool session, or you're sleepy after eating all of the green cake that we had for dessert? What was that? It was like pistachio something? It was green. It was like too Dr. Seussy for me. I didn't go with it. So right now, if you want to hit the two big players in the market, iOS, courtesy of Apple and your Objective-C. On the other hand, we have Java, which is for our Android. And I've got BlackBerry up here. We're going to talk about that very little because you just build your Android app, you wrap it, and it goes onto BlackBerry for, you know, the folks in DC and Europe who want to use it. But if you want to write your app and you want to get it to the biggest part of the market, domestically, the people who spend money, who buy apps, do in-app purchases, are on iOS. So you've got to know Objective-C. The rest of the world, a little further ahead in Android, they're beating out iOS more because there's more money. Well, there's more money in the US and Europe for iOS devices than there is in the rest of the world. And that's where Android is catching up in those, what we would call secondary and third tier markets that everybody poo-pooed and said don't write for them 2 or 3 years ago. Now we're finding that you're sitting going, China is a huge market, guys. India is a huge market. They have one of the neatest, newest, small, low-cost phones in India. All right? So these are the markets that are opening. We got to make sure we support them. So as a developer, you're sitting and saying, personally, I've got to know 2 languages. I've got to write an iOS app. I've got to write an Android app. That's tough. I've got to know 2 languages there. I've duplicated all of my time. I can't really share the logic between them. Data and API backend structures, though, those I can share, but that's not really what we're looking at. We build those out anyway. So if you're going to do modal web, now you got your HTML5. If you're a web guy coming over, you're okay. You're covered there. What happens when you're into Windows 8? Now you knew C. If I knew Objective-C, I could do iOS. But what is this .NET stuff? Or better yet, what if you're a .NET C# guy and now you've got to go learn Objective-C? Yeah, they both have C in the name. They don't behave the same way. They don't act the same either. So if you're going to write an app for your enterprise or for your startup, you're looking at needing to know at least 2 languages to hit about 75% of that global market. If you want, see, I'm not even going to talk about BlackBerry's share. They lie about their numbers. They say we're 10%, but they include stuff that was sold in the 80s. Mobile web, there's a place for mobile web and hybrids. And if we bring in Windows 8, and you're looking at what, another 7% and growing slowly. How many of you guys want to know 3 languages? Yeah, anybody, I mean, well, how many of you guys know 3 languages? Smart Alec over here. How many of you guys know 3 languages, but if you don't know them now, how many of you think to keep your job, you're going to have to go learn 3 new? All right, that's the tough one, right? So what if we could say, instead of you knowing all of these languages, we took something pure like JavaScript, we could write that against an API, and you get a native app on 1, 2, 3 platforms. Enticing. That's what enticed us too. If I'm going to write a native button, and this is where I draw the distinction between frameworks. At the time we were shopping, there were guys wrapping stuff up, and they took things like Sencha, and they took Dojo and some other libraries, and they pulled them in, and you always ended up faking a button. And when you faked the button, you could always tell that it wasn't real. It was like, I've got this button that I created in HTML, and it's got rounded corners like iOS. It's just not quite the same. And there's a reason for that. If I'm writing a button in Objective-C, I write this code. And I get, that's the look I have. I know Objective-C. I find it to be the ugliest language there possibly is. This was just a plain J button with text on it and a rounded edge. And I had to write all of this to get it, all right? So I didn't even say what color the button was. All I did was say I have a button with rounded corners and I gave it a title, all right? It took 2 lines to get a title in it. Android, Java, a little bit better, a lot shorter. I can read this. I know what this means, okay? That's one of the reasons I like JavaScript, because I understood Java and I was like, hey, this makes sense to me. All right, so now I know 2 different ways to create a native button on 2 platforms. And I could fake it. I could have a web view, and in my web view, I can have a little button, and I can say, hey, we're going to have ugly gray square buttons if it's an Android, and we're going to have really cool rounded buttons if it's iOS, but I'm still faking it. And it doesn't feel the same. All right? So one of the ways we get around needing to load multiple languages is we abstract things. How many of you guys can tell me something you abstract in your life today? I'm doing it right now. The API to talk to Keynote is to press a button on the keyboard, but that would require that I'm up there. And even below that, there's a different abstract. We get even closer down to the iron as I go past the keyboard, down into the controllers, down to whether or not I actually tell Keynote to switch between slides. Well, I've abstracted all of that. I've brought that to my new little remote control. When I was a kid, my grandparents had an abstraction for the television. It was me. And we had a little wheel that we turned to focus in UHF and VHF. You young bucks, you have no idea what that is. And antennas that we had to turn, and yeah, just to get 2 channels, NBC and CBS. The idea of an abstraction is that we take what we know, we have somebody else do the heavy lifting for us, and talk to what we don't know. In this case, you may not know Java, you may not know Objective-C. I'm hoping that if you're in here, you have an understanding of JavaScript. And so what we do is we write against an API that abstracts the native calls on iOS and on Android for us. So what are the advantages of abstraction? The first, faster development. I already have an understanding of JavaScript. I don't have to learn 2 more languages. I can reuse knowledge that I have and libraries that I've already written. Less training and retraining. Android comes out and says, hey, by the way, guys, I know we've had these really ugly gray buttons for like 6 years. We're going to change all of that. We're going to make it a different color. By default, things are going to behave differently. You don't have to know how to write that native code. You just keep writing your UI button and in JavaScript against your API, and out the other end, you have an Android 5.0 button. All right? Simpler maintenance. You can bring somebody into the fold, into the company, who understands the one language. You can teach them that one language. You don't have to teach them 2 more. Maintenance on your code is easier because somebody else has already done the heavy lifting and moved you to the next level. You don't have to relearn all of that. You've got one code base to work from. We chose Accelerator at the time. Now this is going back, and there were a lot of different competing frameworks on the market. We had Ruby Motion. Sencha was putting out their web framework to be wrapped by PhoneGap. That was before PhoneGap had official names and all that kind of stuff and got bought by Adobe and all of that. Still PhoneGap at the core. There were guys that were writing stuff in Ruby. There were guys who were writing stuff in their own made-up languages. There was a lot. It was the wild west of cross-platform frameworks. We chose Accelerator because of the robustness of the API, and we'll go through those in a little bit, show you some examples. They were open source. A lot of the guys at the time were open source. There were a couple that were closed sourced. We really liked the fact that we could pull down their framework. We could compile it on our own. If we needed to make changes, if we needed to enhance the SDK, we could do that. That was big to us. Also means we could contribute it. I really like the fact that we could code in a language that I not only loved, but understood. Those are not always the same thing. You can have an appreciation for a language and have no idea how it works. With JavaScript, I have a huge appreciation for something that was written in less than a week. No laughing, that was a bad joke. Don't tell Brendan I said that. I want to make it very clear, Accelerator is not PhoneGap. It is not run inside of a wrapped web view. All right? And we'll talk about what it is. It is not a generator or transpiler. We do not take your JavaScript code and magically make Java code and make iOS code. All right? It uses a bridge. A lot of the larger frameworks do that. JavaScript talks to the bridge. In this case, we call it curl, which is the process of making titanium. and that talks to native APIs. And I'll briefly talk about TI Next, which is the next version. The next version brings us a little bit closer. The bridge is shorter. It's much more compact. Your calls pass through Hyperloop, which will be called HAL. And instead of a large bridge like Kroll, it will be smaller, and you'll be talking to the iron a little bit more closely. The reason I leave that as we'll talk about that, they're on their 4th or 5th generation, their iteration. They started over 2 years ago, and every time their engineers got close, they were like, we don't like this, and they'd start all over again. And so there are some competing frameworks that are already at this point. My argument would be that they're not at the point these guys will be when they release later this year. All right. So that's Accelerator in a nutshell. Titanium is the name of their framework put out by Accelerator, the company. In Titanium, I can take and write a button that looks like this. Can you guys read that and understand what I expect to come out the other end? All right, it's pretty simple, right? I have an API for the Titanium UI namespace. I'm going to create a button with that method. I give it a title. All I've got to do somewhere along the line is add that button to a window or a parent view or whatever I want to add it to on in my app. If we've looked at Alloy, which was released 2 years ago, one of the issues was geeks like us could look at this and go, yep, I can read that. And I understood what that meant. When you bring designers into the, how many of you guys are working with a designer where somebody else dictates your look and feel of everything? How many of you are designers? A couple of you, okay. When you look at this, if you don't have an understanding, you sit and go, that's geek code to me, right? I mean, you may understand it, but still I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't know layout and relationships. Alloy brought in an XML view or an XML format that allowed us to say, I've got a parent window and I put that button on that. And it separated logic code from both display or your layout and from styling. And we'll look at that in detail as we go on too. But these are two different ways, and I put these up here because these are terms that if you're going to hang out in the forums, you're going to ask questions. Folks are going to ask you, is your code classic or is it Alloy? Classic is what we all started with back in 2009, 2010. Alloy is what most folks are writing in the last 2 years or so. Alloy actually ends up compiling in the background down to classic code, so it is in itself an abstraction from what we all grew up writing. All right. So if I was looking at something like this, this is where you sit and say, as a designer, what do I expect this app to look like? I'll give you guys a little moment. Can you guys, somebody tell me what they would expect this rough app to look like on iOS or Android? Down here, I've got a tab group that opens, so I'm assuming that I've got a tab group in there somewhere. I've got tabs, and I know that I need to have windows on tabs, so I've got 2 windows, but I really don't know what this is going to look like, all right? That code generates this on iOS, same code generates this on Android. 1 code base, 2 native looks and feels. These tabs, if you guys look and see, these are native. This isn't wrapped. This isn't a web view that we're faking. This is a native iOS tab, and this is a native Android tab from this rather generic looking JavaScript code. But if I'm a designer, I have no idea what this means. I've got logic in here where I'm adding stuff to a tab group. What does it look like? I see some colors in here, but I'm not sure which ones those apply to. So when Alloy comes along, and I'm sorry, that stretched really badly. I use Sublime, which 3 panes. So I have my logic over here. So here I am opening my main controller, my tab group. If you look up here, I've got an Excel markup. I start with a tab group, which has 2 children, 2 tabs. Those have 2 children of their own. So as a designer, you can look at this and say, I see what the layout looks like in Alloy. But what if later on I want to go and change the styling? Well, we've got what look like style sheets, all right? I'm not going to tell you guys that it's CSS because it's not. We're not on the web. Yes, it does kind of cascade, but to call it CSS would be disingenuous of me because we're not on the web, we're in native, okay? So they call it TSS for titanium style sheet, all right? But it has a lot of the same look. I've got some properties that I add. These are IDs. I can also go by classes and add a class to an element. I can say all of my windows. I could have an element inside of my TSS that is just for windows, and every window starts with those default properties. And so when it comes to, I've got my logic built, I've got my app built, the designer says, hey, we're going to change the rebranding. They don't have to go and dig through a bunch of JavaScript code. They go and change the styling sheet and go, okay, now we've changed the blues to reds or reds to blues, or, you know, everything designers do. So the advantages of using titanium. You write once and you edit for platform. There are some things that are not the same on every device and across every platform. iOS has navigation windows. Android doesn't have that. Android just likes to throw windows up on top of each other, and somebody else is responsible for managing the stack. All right? iOS is real nice. You have a navigation window, I open a window on that. Guess what? I get this cute little bar at the top with arrows, and it knows that I'm going forward or back, or I've kept them on the stack, and when I go back I can kill it, or I can save them, I can use them later. All right? You don't have that functionality. So sometimes you're going to sit and say, hey, if this app is running on iOS, I would like this. Sometimes I'm running on Android where I have, what, an action bar. And I've got all these cool things that I can do with a back button, which I can't do on iOS because they have, what, one button. I'm an Android guy. I really like the beauty of iOS, but I carry an Android device because I like the control. I like to be able to say, I can go back. I can do this. I can, you know, instead of using the same button, did I single press? Did I double? Did I go fast enough? That's drives me nuts as a geek. You can deploy all over. Meaning, all of the supported end target platforms. So you can hit iOS, you can hit HTML5, so if you want to spit it out and throw it on your Firefox OS, you can do that. Windows support is built in right now. They take an HTML5 app, wrap that up, you put that on Windows. True native Windows is coming. They waited for the HAL TI Next stuff because they wanted to make sure that it was quality stuff and was fast enough. I want to go back to the write once and edit. You're going to have to understand the target platform that you're going to hit. As a developer, you need to know the differences between iOS and Android. I kind of briefed over that and said there are differences. If I'm evaluating your app, I'm reviewing it for your boss or your manager because they've asked us to. One of the first things we do in our shop, we have, between my partner and I tend to evaluate from an iOS point of view, even though I carry Android. He evaluates Android. If you show him an app and you're not, it's an Android app and you're not using the action bar the way the Android specs kind of say to the full advantage, he just starts ticking. He goes nuts, runs through pens. Because Daniel expects an Android app to behave like an Android app. Deliver an app that looks exactly the same on two platforms because you thought I'll take lowest common denominator and you're not taking advantage of the platform differences, those are check marks against you. And it really isn't that difficult when you abstract to be able to add that functionality, to create truly beautiful native applications even though you're using an abstracted framework. All right? You don't have to settle for lowest common denominator. Native interface controls, I can tell real quick whether or not your app is a hybrid or a native based upon the look, touch, and feel of your app. I can tell if you faked your action bar at the top by just throwing some views on and pretending that you've got an action bar in your app when you really don't. I can tell if you faked your navigation controller on iOS. All right? Those are the kind of buttons are the big ones. Buttons and how long text scrolls is a dead giveaway in an app, whether you're using a hybrid or not. And as a geek, yes, we're picky when it comes to reviews. Your end users in the back of their mind know the difference. How many of you guys are Facebook users? How many of you are closet Facebook users? All right. Facebook were some of the folks who had the worst public problem with this. They released something that was definitely hybrid. And even the end users, teenage kids, were sitting there going, there's just something not right about this app. And they've made the move to a more native app because somebody said, this isn't right. So your customer may not be able to tell you what the problem is in your app. They're going to know there is a problem, okay? It's like when your car doesn't drive down the road, you're like, I'm not a mechanic, but I should be able to get more than 35 miles an hour on 285. Maybe I should take this to somebody. It just isn't right. All right. I'd already mentioned reduced maintenance in another slide. Okay, simplified deployment to new platforms. When BlackBerry support was added to the Titanium SDK, yes, there are some differences in the BlackBerry native look and feel. It's terrible. Sorry. I used to carry a BlackBerry. I'm so glad I don't have to anymore. But when the time came, I still had a TI UI create window. And instead of saying I now have to go figure out BlackBerry's Java implementation, I could just say I have a window, and I magically got a BlackBerry window on BlackBerry devices. So when we rolled out a couple of apps, notice that, couple of apps on a BlackBerry, we didn't have to sit and go and learn all of the BlackBerry native code all over again. We read their specs, we knew what they expected for look and feel and design, but we didn't have to go learn something new. That was huge for our customers because that reduces your costs. Again, utilizing JavaScript skills. This is big to me because I came with pure JavaScript back in the day, in 90s, 95, 96. I discount the value of jQuery as saying, I know jQuery, so I know JavaScript. jQuery works very well if you have a DOM. You don't have a DOM in native. So real quick, if your skill set is based around jQuery, you shouldn't be marking JavaScript on your resume. You'll get caught with almost any framework. And I'm not being mean, I'm being practical as a guy who hires folks and make recommendations. So you can utilize your good quality JavaScript skills to build your native apps. Disadvantages. If I were a company shill, I wouldn't tell you what the disadvantages are, but I'm a guy who uses it. You modify often. There are a lot of times where you're walking through code, and because of difference in platforms, you have a fork out in your code. You do an if. If this is Android, I need to go do this. If this is iOS, we don't dare do that, so we need to go and do this. Those type of things, okay? So you end up finding that you do modify your code, your JavaScript code, to match your target platforms. I'll give you some numbers on how much of that code could be reused in a little bit, but that's something to keep in mind. It's not 100% I wrote this code. The example I gave was very simple. It was a tab group, 2 tabs, 2 windows. Boy, it looks amazing, all right? I'm going to tell you that when you get into 10, 12, 15, 20, 25, 80,000 lines of code in a mobile app, you're going to have a lot of places where you have Android-specific code and you have iOS-specific code. And sometimes, well, you do need to have that because you want to target those native platforms as best you can. New feature delays. When you're abstracted, you're separated from the newest thing because you have to wait for the man in the middle to patch or fix something for you. That includes bug fixes. Because it's open source, our shop, we have ObjectiveC guys and Java guys in-house, so we submit bug fixes almost as fast as we find them. We will have pull requests sent in. If our guys say, hey, look, we found this bug, this is how you fix it, you submit a JIRA ticket to Accelerator, and at the same time, there's a pull request that kind of follows along behind it, all right? But most folks aren't in that position. If you are, I'm happy to see your PRs come through. If you're not, I understand that too. But these are just, I'm just being honest with you. New features are delayed, and sometimes it takes a little longer for bugs to be fixed and repaired. That's just the way it is. Code reuse. This is the biggest question if you're a manager or you're a decision maker. So Steve told me that I don't have 100% code reuse. That's true, because I wouldn't want to lie to you. I will tell you that 100% of your non-UI code is reusable. Doesn't matter what platform you're on, 1 + 1 = 2. Most times. How many of you guys really love playing with real numbers in JavaScript? All right, we won't go there though. 100% of your non-UI code is reusable. The idea is to separate your logic out from your UI sections, build common JS modules, require them in, you're good to go. UI code. Back in the old days when we were doing Classic, we were at about 50%. So I would write code. By the time the app was all done, we averaged between our large fancy projects that had 3D spinning wheels on a game engine for the menu to your very basic, Twitter RSS feed reader type of stuff. We ran about 50%. So whenever we quoted something, if you said, hey, it's arbitrary number, it's $10,000 to write your iOS app, to add Android, you're probably going to be about 50% more. All right, that's not a bad deal, because you could be paying $40,000, so instead you're at $30,000. All right, arbitrary numbers. App prices vary based upon skill and feature sets. Alloy. When we moved into Alloy, we recovered a lot more. We're running closer to 80–85%. It's easier to see the layouts. It's easier to do the styling to separate out those concerns, because all the heavy lifting is done by the Alloy underneath. All right? Now, the better the coder, the more the reuse. We refactor in-house. Those of us who've been writing code for 20 years, we still refactor. One of the worst character flaws of a programmer is the fact that they refactor their own code. The stuff they wrote today is not that good at 5 o'clock this afternoon. You look at it and go, that's the worst stuff I ever written. I need to redo that. I learned something that I read a Stack Overflow this afternoon. I could do that better. All right? And we have a tendency to do that at the disgust of management because we just want to keep moving on and bettering our code, because we got pride in this, right? How many of you guys don't have pride in your work? That's okay. That's a good answer, because your managers are watching the video. All right. Installing Titanium. I threw these slides in because I don't expect you to open up your laptops. We're not doing a workshop. I just wanted to have them in the slides so that you guys could reference them later. And slides will be available on SlideShare. You can just look me up by name later this afternoon. First, this is the official way of installing Titanium. Visit the site, create an account. They have a DMG. If you're on OS X, download it, run the installer, you're good to go. If you're on Windows, there's an executable that'll install it for you. As you're doing that, I would highly recommend you open up the setup guide that'll walk you through the minimum requirements. There are some gotchas. Node 12, dot 12 is supported. However, dot 12 is just ugly by itself. I really recommend you find a later version of dot 10 and use that, because I know that works. We haven't even updated our shop stuff to 12 yet. But those are the kind of things that'll get you. You just want to make sure you're running the proper requirements, all right? Studio will attempt to walk you through installing all the stuff you need. It will try to download the right version of Node for you, make sure you have the right version of Java. It'll try to make sure you've got Xcode installed if you're on OS X and you want to build for iOS, and it will try to make sure you get the Android tooling. The guys that write the installer, I give props to them, I really do, because I know that in our shop, we have systems that theoretically are identical to each other. We have systems that are cloned, that don't behave, 2 of them cloned from the same image, do not behave the same way after the cloning. One will have this issue, one will have this issue. They're sisters, they came off the line, they've got serial numbers that are within 1,000 digits of each other. But for whatever reason, they just don't work. So when somebody's writing an installer, you may have some issues. So, second slide. This is for the geeks. This is pretty much how our shop installs stuff, because then I control each of those segments, and our stuff gets installed with a grunt script on each of the systems. So we install Node, grunt, and then everything else runs itself. Walk your way through. I recommend Node 10 for right now. Xcode only applies if you're on a Mac wanting to do iOS development. Android tooling, it's okay to use the latest right now. There are times that the latest is broken from Google or from Android. Make sure you set the Android path tooling. A lot of folks forget that one. I can't stand the Android emulator. It is the slowest thing there is. Even if you're using the x86 one, it is just slow. I'm a big fan of Genymotion. We own a bunch of licenses so that we can put it on our systems. Just search the internet, it's there. because you want to have it. If you're going to do development with Google Play services, which require for maps, push notifications, so you have GCM, those kind of things, you're going to have Google Apps libraries installed. So there's a lot of stuff. I can't tell you, but you'll find it on the internet. Make sure you have the right JDK installed. On Windows right now, you need to have the 32-bit version. Yes, you can build 64-bit apps, but you need a 32-bit JDK. And then this used to be a bigger deal on the Mac. I would say, hey, you want to have 1.6 installed from Apple instead of the Oracle one. I still kind of recommend that if you're not real tech savvy. 1.8 from Oracle can cause you some issues every once in a while, and so I don't really go that way. Sudo's in brackets because if you're on Mac, Node expects some weird permissions in different places, so you may have to sudo your installs. Install the Titanium CLI, install Alloy, run setup. It's going to ask you some questions about your environment, and then download the latest SDK. And at this point, it's 3.51, and probably will be for another week or so. I don't expect to see 4.0 until probably maybe mid-April. It's in really raw state right now. The last thing I would recommend you do, and this is a really cool tool. One of the guys in Australia built this for us. It's called Titanium Shadow, or TI Shadow. Basically, it wraps up all your code and only pushes the changes to your device. You can push those changes over the internet. So if you've got a client who's installed your little utility app on their system, you can just push the changes to an app and they can see the changes there. Great for development. We can have 4 or 5 devices set up on a desk, and you push out changes. So you say, hey, I want to see what that blue button looks like. You make a change in your code, it picks up the changes, pushes that code out to your devices or your emulators, simulators, and you're looking at Android, iPad, iPhone, different form factors, different devices. On Android, you could be looking at what does this code look like on a 5.0 device, on a 4.4, or even as far, well, our shop doesn't support anything older than 4 right now. So we only ever go back to Android 4.0. And then this year, probably bounce sometime up to 4.1. As that big green circle that Google likes to put out every month changes, we tend to drop support for those lower end devices. So that's how you do your installation. I'm going to see if I can't switch this over and show you an app written in Titanium. That source code is available here if you want to go and look at it and play with it. This is a movies app. And this was written by the team at Appcelerator. All right. And I have some cheats in here. So I'm going to load this on an iPhone 6. What you're watching is actually, well, it already compiled the Alloy code for us. So we're going to run Xcode real quick. Should build our app and start our simulator for us. Questions so far while we're waiting for this to build out? Anybody? Yes, sir.
So if it's not using like webview or anything like that, how does it actually work?
Okay, that's a great question. Basically what you have, you write your JavaScript code, that passes down through curl, and there's a proxy on the back side. Yeah, I guess we should talk to the internet. Sorry about that. It talks to a proxy. So you have a proxy that talks to a native button. So when you do a TI UI create button, and that's forever, you should be allowed to do that. That's fine. This is really large, so we don't need to see all of that. So let's scale that down to 50%. All right. And so those loading up, they are. I apologize, Wi-Fi was slow, so I'm actually tethered off a phone. I'm just happy that everything is working. All right. One of the things I want you to watch, and I'll come back to your question. One of the things I want you to watch is the animations. Animations inside of a web view are very slow and jumpy because you're relying on the engine that's running the web view. It looks great on the Retina display. I'd show it to you, but So basically what you're looking at is we're taking advantage of the full screen, well, the underlap underneath the status bar on iOS, which is what you would expect to see on a newer iOS 7, iOS 8 type of application. You're using the full potential of what Apple thinks you should use. So that is on iOS. Let's go ahead. I'm going to kill this, and we're going to run this on a Nexus 4 Genymotion emulator. And as long as we got our fingers crossed and Android tooling behaves itself, we should see one start. So to answer your question, I do a TI UI create. I get a proxy to a native object, and my commands or color changes, those kind of things, pass down through the proxy down to the native layer. And when I was talking earlier about TI Next, one of the things we're going to see is the distance from here to here shrink drastically. I know how works. I'm privy to that. I can't share that yet. Guys, it's going to be cool. It really is. And the fact that they've waited, I mean, they're on their 4th or 5th generation. They wrote a couple times and they said, this isn't fast enough. I don't like this. And so they kept throwing that back, and the engineers kept coming with new and new ideas. The next version is very cool. My understanding is they're planning to open source a lot of that tech. They're waiting on some patent stuff to get that out. That's my understanding. All right, we're going to continue that. And same code base. There are your two apps. All right. So on this side, we have Genymotion emulator running. We've got the same type of animations built in from the same code base. All right. How many of you guys have played with Accelerator or one of the other cross-platform frameworks? You have. Which ones have you played with? PhoneGap. Played with PhoneGap. Okay. You'll notice a serious difference between the two. A little bit more learning curve. If you're coming from the web side, you're going to sit and go, this is a little different, because you stop thinking in pages, you start thinking in screens, and you have to. You start thinking native. Is this a window? What am I doing with it? Where in PhoneGap, you're still thinking like you're building for a browser. Even no matter what your terminology is, what you call them, that's still what you're thinking. And I've seen some great PhoneGap apps out there. Security. Oh, I didn't even mention this. I don't even have a slide for that. How many of you guys have ripped open an APK or an IPA written in PhoneGap? Anybody? If you're doing enterprise, and I saw some enterprise hands come up, if you're thinking you're a startup, you have value in your code. One, as a developer, you should have as little logic in your client as you can, and you should have most of that on your server, so your proprietary stuff is hidden. However, there are times that you need to have logic in your app. You need to ask yourself, is the code that I wrote available to the average Joe, a hacker? How secure is my code? That is one of the first questions we asked when we were looking at Accelerator, and it's important enough I should have had it on the slide, and I'm glad I remembered to remind you to look at this. When evaluating a framework, it's not just about how easy it is to build something, but how secure what you wrote is. Accelerator takes your JavaScript code, your stylings, and in a production environment, encrypts those at 256K and embeds them down inside the binary. All right? They have had a number of their enterprise folks come along, evaluate that under NDA, and it was enough for their enterprise clients to sign off on the encryption that they use to protect code. That is a big deal. When you're doing your evaluation, you need to be asking any other competing framework, can I see my code? Is my code safe inside of your product? And don't just take their word for it. Have your engineers rip it apart, right? I will say there was a small flaw found in the last year Android only, for Appcelerator. It was fixed within 6 hours. Somebody brought it up in the middle of the night. One of the other Titans and I saw it appear on the net. We said something to engineering, and engineering worked overnight to release a fix by the next morning. It was not an easy way of getting to your code. It was possible. And their guys jumped on it real fast and said, you're right, this is an odd case. Let's solve that. And so changed the way some of that was done on Android. Android is a unique beast because you compile down to bytecode, and if you guys understand Java, there ain't nothing secure about bytecode. Anything that is done that way can be reverse engineered somewhere. Stuff's available in memory, always. So not everything is 100% secure, but you want to know how easy is it that your competitor is going to rip your app apart and figure out what you did cool to get this effect or that effect, all right? So what do you guys want? What time is it? How much time do we have left? I told Pratik I did not have 70 minutes.
20 minutes. We
got 20 minutes. All right. What do you guys want to see? What do you guys want to know? Because we've got 20 minutes. I can take questions. Yes, sir.
Can you mix and match native features you're building a type?
Absolutely. I want to include iBeacon in my new iPhone app. iBeacon is not an API that's included inside. I can take an iBeacon library, I can wrap that. Some of the competitors will poo-poo that. They'll be like, oh no, we can stock straight to the hardware, or we can stock straight to the library. With TI Next, we'll have that. But for now, you can take your library, you wrap that, and you expose your native Objective-C or Java calls to JavaScript, and you pull it in as a module. It is not that difficult. I can do it, so it's not difficult at all. All right. Basically what you're doing is you're saying, if I have an init call for whatever library you're doing, a piece of hardware, a beacon, or whatever, you just simply wrap that method and expose that to the JavaScript side. All right? And you do the same thing for any of the platforms. So does that answer your question? Because that's a big one. Can I talk to printers? Can I talk to Amazon S3, Amazon. You can use the REST calls to push stuff to Amazon. However, if you're using REST, you lose some of the other functionality. You don't have the secure login. You're not creating tokens for your uploads. You can, but it's much easier to manage that in the native library. Upload manager is something else. If I'm uploading and I'm only using the REST, then I'm responsible for managing the upload in the XHR call or HTTP client call, where if I use Amazon's S3 and I just magically say, upload this, it uploads and then fires a callback when I'm done. So those are the kind of things that you would think about extending and wrapping with. Yes, sir?
So some of the device-specific features, the iOS might have specific features that Android might not have, and vice versa. How does this be used?
I cheat in classic code because the namespace on an iOS device, the namespace for Android wouldn't exist. I'd have something like if not TI Android, ti.android, and I'd hit that namespace, and if it didn't exist, then you'd run iOS code. In Alloy, they've extended some constants for you. So you can sit and say, if OS underscore iOS, so in other words, am I on an iOS device, then I run this section of code. And you simply fork out from there. So like if I open a window, for example, any app, I'm just going to open a window, but I know I'm on Android, and I'm going to have my action bar. I'll sit and say, if OS Android, does my window have an activity? Because I may not have an activity if I'm on a pre-action bar era device. And even though we may say at build time, I'm only going to run on 4.x devices, so I know I should have that action bar, I can't guarantee that because Android's open source. And there are carriers that screw with stuff all the time, so you never make that assumption and say, because I'm on a 4.0 device, I know I'm going to have an action bar. You still do the check and make sure you've got the activity, and does the activity have the action bar, and you work your way backwards. And then you sit and populate your menu. And so you'd have that section of code that is Android specific, but over on iOS, I may have something different. All right? I can fork, yes ma'am?
I was going to say, I know you talked a little bit about how you can use Android specific stuff, but is there any functionality on native Android apps that you just simply cannot get with Continue?
Functionality on Android.
Or is it all like you can get all of it?
I can't talk to wearables yet. Yeah, the tickets are open on that.
What about like widgets?
Widgets are the other one. Because widgets, the way they run in a separate context, they're not run under the context that would interpret the JavaScript. On iOS, make sure I say this right. I'm running through my mind Jira tickets to make sure that I've seen stuff. We can't talk to Google. We can't write an app. We can't write the Apple Watch portion of the code in Titanium, but I can package that with my Titanium app. So I can write that in Xcode, I can bring that in, and at the time that I package my IPA for release, I can include that in there. What's the other thing that we just got in iOS 8 on the desktop? Extensions, so that I can drop those down and do fancy stuff with those. You can do extensions now. That's been added. Those are things. I'm thinking of Android, things that I absolutely can't do. Android is really cool because anything I think I can't do, I can just fire an intent and figure out who wants to do it. You know, somebody says, hey, do you want to do pictures? Oh, let's ask. Anybody do pictures? And you get 75 apps that all lie and claim they do pictures. Scanning, there's a bunch of scanner modules out there, Bluetooth, talking to printers. Printers is an odd one. Saw a project come through. We ended up not taking it, but somebody was asking the question. They were trying to talk to a Bluetooth printer, and the specs were getting them, they had to write all of the headers for the data packets that were going to go to the printer and everything else, and he says, can we do this? And I said, you may, but I don't want to do that. It reminded me of the 1970s and 80s when I was a kid and we were actually writing printer drivers, and somebody goes, can you talk to this, you know, spinwriter.matrix printer or daisy wheel printer, and you had to go write, you know, actually wrote the code that went to the printer. I said, I think we've moved further than that. I think they're responsible for giving you the drivers. But those are one-off type of things. Yes, sir?
Have you tried Calabash as a cross-platform?
Calabash for cross-platform or for testing?
Cross-platform testing, the whole thing together.
I have not. RTDD, I got to think which, depending on the project, because it depends on who we integrate with. We are firm believers in test-driven design. I'm not so anal that everything needs a test. There's some absurdity level that you can go to there. The guy to talk to about Calabash testing with TI is with Codex Labs in Nashville. And if you leave me your information on a piece of paper, I can get you in touch with him. McElroy, and he should be here tomorrow for the HTML5 meetup group. I think he's driving back down. So, yes, sir.
Question about testing. So, a lot of devices have to support, let's say, a doing app, has to support various devices now. So, from the testing perspective, what do you guys do? Do you buy all those devices, physically test it, or do you have emulators? Just curious.
When we talk to a client, basically we say in the specs, we guarantee that you will run on a Nexus 4 and Nexus 5. There's a reason for that. Those are Google's devices, and they are guaranteed to run what Google says is going to come out of the box. Does that mean we don't test on other stuff? No, we have a nice collection of hardware. I hate to say that. My tax guy wonders why we buy so much stuff and write it off every year. He goes, there's no way you guys are carrying around 10 new phones this year. No, they're all sitting on a desk, and we pull them out when it comes time to test. Two ways to do this. First is, are you doing CI? We actually run a Jenkins server at the office. I know that sounds weird. There's a lot of folks that don't, but because it's JavaScript code, we can run it, your common JS stuff that's not UI specific. You can fire that against Jasmine. You can fire that against, well, Calabash, you know, any of the testing frameworks you want, because there's no Android or Titanium specific code in there, all right? Sometimes you can pull in Alloy and you can kludge that in and kind of patch that in so you can run those tests. On ours, we do two types. We run and test our common JS stuff, so we run out and make API calls. We check to see if 1 and 1 is always 2, all right, when you're calling into a logic. When it comes to UI testing, we can fire up inside on our Jenkins server, we will fire up first an iOS simulator, and the scripts all run against that, and they can reach in and they can go color, I expect the color of the button to be blue. And it comes back and says, my color is blue. And I expect it to have a height of this. Yep. It has a parent, and the parent is, yep, I've got all of those kind of things. So we can do that. But when it comes to look and feel, we have tried services like SOSTA and that type of testing where you run out and it automatically tests views and screens. There's some great services that are doing that. When I test, before I deliver it to a client, I want it in hand on a device. I don't know how many times everything has passed tests. It has passed logic tests, it's gone through some SOSTA testing or one of the other services, it has even gone out to group and it's come back, oh yeah, this is great, everything passes, it meets spec. And I put it in my hand and I go, nope, that doesn't work. Well, yes it does, it functionally meets. Well, no, I believe that the animation is, you know, 1/100 of a second too slow. We need to figure out a way to tweak that because the human body is so much better at testing. Test-driven design development is a yes or a no situation. The human gut, the developer, when you get to that, you lose the artist side of what we do. And there is a lot of art into what developers build. All right, yes, sir.
If you were making the decision today, what other platforms would you be looking at?
I will tell you the ones I've looked at in the last 30 days. I'm a business guy, and so I am always reevaluating. I've looked at NativeScript, which is not quite ready yet. I'm not going to tell you what's wrong with them, I'm just going to tell you what I've looked at. I've looked at their stuff. I continue to look at PhoneGap to see if they've come up to speed, and they're better than they were, and there is a niche for them. It's not for us. We've looked at Xamarin. Xamarin failed, and I'll tell you why. They have a great platform, but we're not .NET. Our guys are Objective-C, our guys are Java. Nearly all of our guys are Java. Some of us happen to know Objective-C, just different orders than the others. And they are so .NET, and I came out as a MCSE. I came out of the Microsoft world, I understood it. I really left about the time Visual Basic 6 died and we got stuck with .NET, and I didn't like that, so I got this anger thing. No, I'm kidding. .NET and C# just never appealed to me. And so for them, it was a non-starter. But they've got great product, they've got great support. So I can't knock their stuff. Who else is out there? React Native was just announced. There's nothing to look at. I can download and I can release an app tomorrow with this platform. Xamarin, you could release an app tomorrow with their platform. Telerex guys with NativeScript, they're not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to release anything until next month because right now the license is development only and not distribution. React, is it even available? React Native hasn't been put out publicly yet. Only the guys that went to the conference can look at it, right? Because I haven't seen it out yet, so I don't even think you can play with that. I would say those are probably the new movers and shakers to look at. And there's other ones. There's still some guys trying to get Ruby on mobile, and they cross transpile some of that stuff. So that's kind of where you're at. But I'm a business guy. I evaluate and I keep coming back to what I've got because I've got an investment in it, and the cost to change has to be that much more. But looking at it today, yeah, I'd probably stick with these guys. And that's not a probably. I would stick with these guys. They have one of the largest APIs. You've got buttons, you've got, well, just take a look at their docs and look at the API. I can't quote numbers because their numbers and mine differ. They count every property like an API extension, and I don't. I look and go, I got Windows, okay, I assume these things with Windows. I've got buttons, I assume these things with buttons. So I count 2 as opposed to 30. So that answer your question? Yes, sir.
Can you still use webviews?
Hold on, I missed the first part.
Can you still use the webviews with your...
Oh, absolutely. There is a WebView component because sometimes you have to. Sometimes you're trying to interface with, oh, I don't know, a service that uses OAuth. And they say, this is how you do that. We're going to give you this URL and you need to load that, and then you authenticate. And you sit and go, well, that's not native. Well, you're stuck. All right. Sometimes you will get content that needs to be updated on a regular basis. And sometimes just the flow of text it's just simpler to say, instead of having a label, even on iOS with the new way we can take a label and we can adjust text inside the label, it's still kind of kludgy even for Apple to do. So you're just going to say, hey, I'm going to throw text on the screen. Fine. Format it with the CSS throw it on the screen, and you're good to go. All right.
Do you have any numbers in terms of performance degradation?
In a web view? In this? No, I can't give you an absolute number. What I can tell you that in the number of development hours, you're considerably less with this. If you take a guy who knows Java but doesn't know Android, and you set him down, let's say he knows Java and JavaScript, you sit him down and say, I need you to build me a window with something on it. And you load up the new Android Studio, which, by the way, is much better than the old one. I'm a big fan of getting rid of Eclipse for all of our lives, but that's neither here nor there. It had its place. It's slow, and it's like a dinosaur. Yeah, that was my spiel. I'm sorry. I'll stop. Sorry, I got off track. My hatred of Eclipse. What was your question? Your question was, oh, time. So you set a guy down in front and he says, okay, here's the documentation for this, and here's the documentation for Android. And you say, I want you to see how fast you can build me just a basic app. And he's sitting there trying to figure out, okay, I've got to do this. Oh, now I've got to go build a theme to make sure this runs on. And so he's got to build up a theme that is app compatible. Well, that's kind of all included in the background. It'll boot without one, and then you can customize it later on if you need to. So there's a lot of that getting started cost reduction. Yeah. Any other questions?
What about specialty devices like POS types of things, like AC40s remote?
Running Android?
Yeah, that run on Android, or even like the Honeywells.
I've seen success in some areas, and I've seen failures in some others.
Is there a lot of custom integration with like the barcode scanner and things like that?
I've seen guys doing a lot of barcode scanning stuff, where they take a regular Android device, they want to attach a barcode scanner to scan car VINs, to scan product on shelves, you name it. I've seen it in medical. And it all comes down to, do they release a native SDK? Can you wrap that kind of thing?
Gotcha.
Yeah. And there's a lot of guys in the community. The other thing you guys are going to see, and I do have some more slides. Let me get to those real quick. Because they have just raw content on them. Thank you. I'll throw these slides up real quick. See, we did burn 20 minutes. That sounds terrible. I burned 20 minutes of your lives. All right, so we did this one. All right, additional resources. Docs, Q&A. You guys asked about custom modules. If you go to get with 2ts.i, it didn't show, did it? Huh. How come? Let's try this again. There we go. All right. Documentation. When I started in 95, oh, that was a different start. When I started with Titanium, our documentation was pretty much, we opened up the source code and we read and saw what the engineers had done. There was really no documentation. That has come a long way. The 3.0 docs, there was a big emphasis in the last 2 years to update the documentations for the API. Quality stuff up there along with guides and that kind of stuff. Q&A. The Q&A is changing this year. The format that they originally put up, the forum software, it was old, unwieldy, and unbearable. They couldn't manage it, and so they're moving to a new one. There is still good content there, but there's not a lot of folks answering questions right now. If you have a question and you're in this group, find me on Twitter, ping me, and I'll see if I can't help you get started and answer a question that way. For those looking for modules and extra widgets, Git.io scans GitHub, runs through those real quick and indexes and tells you if a module is iOS, Android, both platforms, CommonJS, that kind of stuff. Short list, if you want people to follow on Twitter who are in the Accelerator and or mobile scene, there's some crossover there. I would go ahead and grab my list there. These are the folks that I would say are mover and shakers there. All right, let's see. We did questions and answers. All right, if you visit this URL, the password is titanium with a capital T, take the survey. We're giving away 4 $5 gift cards in exchange for your name, and we call and pester you. No, that's not true. I might email you and see how you're doing, if there was anything you would have liked to know or missed, that kind of stuff. All right? That's pretty much it, if nobody else has any other questions. And I'll be around afterwards too, but I'll yield the floor to the next guy coming along. You guys good? All right, thank you.